Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit and celebrating the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. My name is Jana Larsen, and I am the Human Resources Director and the coordinator of the Economic Justice Campaign of We the World, as well as many other things for We the World. For the full 11 days schedule, you can register for free by going to we.net. And you can see replays of the recordings. You can also make a contribution to support We the World by going to we.net, and we thank you. Today, we have Thato and her guests discussing sustaining our planet, addressing Africa's challenges and next steps. Welcome, Thato.
Thank you very much, Jana. I am so excited to be here and with my guests to explore the critical environmental challenges Africa faces and identify actionable steps to foster sustainable development, considering the unique ecological and socioeconomic and political contexts. On today's session, we have Dean Bhekumuzi, Bhebhe, who is the co-facilitator of Don't Gas Africa, a campaign led by African civil society to ensure Africa is not locked into fossil gas production. Dean also serves as the campaign's lead at Dean also serves at the Pan-African climate think tank, PowerShift Africa. Then we also have Antoniette Moleele. Yeah, I think we should start over. My technology just,
Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit and celebrating the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. My name is Jana Larsen, and I am the Human Resources Director and the coordinator of the Economic Justice Campaign of We the World, as well as many other things for We the World. For the full 11-day schedule, you can register for free by going to we.net. And you can see replays of the recordings. You can also make a contribution to support We the World by going to we.net, and we thank you. Today, we have Thato and her guests discussing sustaining our planet, addressing Africa's challenges, and next steps. Welcome, Thato.
Thank you so much, Jana, for the lovely introduction. I'm so excited for today's session and conversation to explore the critical environmental challenges Africa faces and identify actionable steps to foster sustainable development, considering the unique ecological, socioeconomic, and political contexts. On today's session, we have Dean Bhekumuzi Bhebhe, who is the Senior Just Transitions and Campaigns Advisor at PowerShift Africa and the campaign's lead at Don't Gas Africa, a campaign led by African civil society to ensure Africa is not locked into fossil gas production. Then we also have Antoniette Moleele, who is a climate change practitioner and advocacy and capacity development consultant with a focus on climate smart agribusiness and food systems, environmental sustainability for youth, gender, and vulnerable communities. Her track record includes community engagement, project coordination, facilitation, and policy development. She's a youth negotiator at UNFCCC COP on the loss and damage and global stocktake tracks. And she is the executive director at We the World Botswana chapter and the founder of the Adversary. We also have Goodness Dickson, who is an environmentalist and climate activist from Nigeria with over 5 years of experience in community development and activism. He's a certified environmental educator from Cornell University with vast experience with working with advocating for environmental sustainability to address environmental issues and climate change. Through these experiences, he has developed youth leadership, community development, and research skills with a strong passion for community and youth development. I will be moderating the session. My name is Thato Angelina Gabaitse. I'm the Development and Admin Director at We the World and founding chairperson of We the World Botswana chapter. Right. We will be getting right into the session as I've already welcomed our panelists. Please feel free as we'll be just engaging and having an informal conversation about Africa's challenges and next steps. Trusting you, the lovely panelists, being the experts that you are. So we'll get on to Dean to give us an overview of the key environmental challenges faced by African nations. Over to you, Dean.
Thank you so much, Thato, for inviting me into this exciting space. You've asked a very big question, so I hope I'll be able to tackle it in the very few minutes you've provided me. But it's key that we are having this discussion because this comes at a critical moment. We have to acknowledge, right, African countries continue to struggle with endless plethora of challenges. Cycles of sovereign debt crises that tend to weaken the continent's degree of economic and monetary sovereignty, thus reducing the fiscal policy space necessary to tackle national priorities such as health, education, infrastructure, and other public services. This process has also forced African countries to accept punitive loan conditionalities that further weaken the state and hurt the most vulnerable people and lock countries into further dependence on external financing. And on top of that, we are grappling with a climate crisis that has been operationalized through a plethora of climatic shocks, floods, droughts across the plains of Africa. Now, we are at a critical moment where we need to analyze and bring in the nexus between climate, energy, and development, in the sense that how do the three emerge in order to create a tapestry of solutions that are able to actually address the 600 million Africans without energy access, first of all, the billion without clean cooking alternatives, and essentially address Africa's current immediate developmental needs in a sustainable way where there's long-term prosperity across the African continent. In the energy discussion, obviously, renewable energy comes out more prominently, but we have to be aware that as we pursue the renewable energy journey, Africa cannot reproduce the extractive economic model that has destroyed our ecosystems through the dash for gas and also exploiting the continent's resources with regards to oil and coal. This alone has also resulted in other crises. We do see food and energy insecurity, poverty, socioeconomic exclusion, and conflicts, as well as economic and ecological destruction, as I mentioned earlier on. African economies at this point have been locked at the bottom of the global value food chain since colonial times, and we need to chart a path where the continent has to acknowledge that we cannot continue to be the continent that provides just simply cheap raw materials for others to feed their industrial development while also tackling a climate emergency. Now, remember, Africa is a continent where we produce what we don't consume and we consume what we don't produce. So in order for us to really deal with the current climate crisis and development challenges in Africa, we need to tap on the existing potential, such as renewable energy resources, right? And use our transition minerals, for example, so our chromium, our magnesium, our lithium, as leverage tools in order for us to establish economic and climate resilient systems. Now, this resilience needs to be grounded on creating this sort of ecosystem in Africa that will help the continent prepare for its role to be a renewable energy hub. along with the ongoing debate on a just transition. And this would essentially require a synchronized effort to enable the operationalization of climate systems and economies in Africa that are well equipped to anticipate, withstand, and bounce back from any type of climate or economic shock. So for us to deliver such an economic justice that would unlock this transformative people-centered energy system to the African people, our leaders must really then put in place a long-term strategic plan that is grounded on Pan-African values and Pan-African principles, or rather a Pan-African policy framework that would leverage the complementarity of our culture and our resources and our capabilities to manufacture and deploy clean energy, clean cooking, clean transportation, public infrastructure, which are the essential building blocks of development and prosperity across the African continent. But remember, this is also coming up at a time where we see, for example, the untapped renewable energy potential for the African continent. If we look at what the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has estimated, Africa is home to close to 60% of the best solar resources globally, yet we live in an age where we only have 1% of installed solar PV capacity. So similarly, Africa just currently exploits only just 0.01% of its potential of wind generation capacity. If we look at other studies done by the IFC, for example, it suggests that Africa has onshore wind potential of over 180,000, if I'm not mistaken, 180,000 terawatts per hour per year, enough to satisfy the entire continent's current electricity demands 250 times over. So there is a growing evidence, an evidence base that Africa can chart a course towards fully renewable energy systems that are accessible and affordable, but with the right investments that are really required to deliver these systems, instead of us really, or rather creating, an investment portfolio where we deliver these systems in a manner that they begin to pay for themselves many times over. This is because the initial costs of investing in renewable energy systems will be offset multiple times by eliminating the ongoing expenses related to fossil fuel extraction, processing, and consumption. But remember, on the other hand, the risks of pushing ahead with fossil fuel production and ending up with stranded assets are actually high, because the future global demand for gas and the price it commands on the commodity market is by no means guaranteed. So the glut of supply coming to the market currently and the prospect of shrinking demand in the near future is likely to threaten the long-term feasibility of African gas production, making the current dash for gas really invalid and void, especially amongst newcomer producers whose reserves would not come online for 5 to 10 years. So for example, the idea around gas as a transition fuel. If you were to invest all our money into gas and we say, yes, indeed, gas is going to be a transition fuel, what are we then committing? Are we committing financial fraud? Because in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have gas infrastructures in the name of transition that are going to not be used anymore because we would have ideally leapfrogged. So the idea is to actually start investing in renewable energy now as a means to actually chart a path forward for Africans and by Africans. And then just as guessing closing, we also need to talk around the role of financial institutions, particularly if we're looking at the idea of, for example, climate adaptation across the African continent. Now, on the one aspect that I wanted to touch on is we need as a continent to start really adopting indigenous systems in terms of our food production in comparison to other food solutions that currently exist, like climate smart agriculture. We need to try and push for agroecology, push for organic farming, for monoculture as well. But really on the idea around Africa's adaptation efforts, they've been long chronically underfunded. Because if you look at the current adaptation finance flows, we're looking at close to 12 billion per annum, despite the needs being closer to 53 billion per annum. And this suggests that over 100 billion per year must be then channeled to Africa by at least 2035. Yet the funds that are currently earmarked for adaptation projects in Africa are just a fraction of this. This is particularly great loss, given that every dollar spent on adaptation can actually lead a potential return from $2 to $10 across the African continent. So we are at a crossroads, and even looking back along the African Climate Summit, which concluded last year with the adoption of the Nairobi Declaration, that statement highlighted the continent's specific vulnerabilities and the urgent need for global cooperation. But it really just fails to raise the ambition to provide substantive depth on adaptation issues, particularly finance, which is such a key priority for Africa. So, for example, the declaration called on the global community to honor the 100 billion, but it fails to echo similar sentiments for them to uphold their commitment that they announced at COP26 to double adaptation finance, or to call for a drastic increase in the quality and the reliability of finance. So we even come to a space where we see gendered impacts of the climate crisis, which are also just largely overlooked. Land rights, which are notably absent and equally problematic, is the reference even now to the new African Carbon Markets Initiative. The carbon markets are just simply a dangerous and short-sighted ambition for solution that offers companies permits to just continue polluting across the African continent. And just to close, finally, I think what we also need to think around is the science aspect, the idea of trying to bring in geoengineering across the African continent, essentially, right? Geoengineering encompasses a range of speculative technologies such as solar radiation management, which is just one of them, which is intended, quote unquote, to address the effects, not the root causes of climate change. And many solar geoengineering techniques have been proposed, but the most contemplated is the one that was labeled the stratospheric aerosol injection, which really looks at fleets of high-flying airplanes continuously just spraying large amounts of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere to mimic the temporary cooling effects of, for example, volcanic eruptions. In reality, such measures would actually likely destabilize an already severely disrupted climate. So consider that, for example, just for argument's sake, consider that volcanic eruptions have historically precipitated extreme weather events and famines. So moreover, climate models have long indicated that stratospheric aerosol injections could alter, for example, the Indian monsoons and cause more frequent persistent droughts in the volatile Sahel region in Africa. Even according to the UN Human Rights Council, solar geoengineering could seriously interfere with the enjoyment of human rights for millions and perhaps billions of people. So some of the solar radiation proponents argue that if spraying such aerosols into the stratosphere does not achieve the desired result, it is also possible to stop. But that could really, again, prove dangerous because the masking effect of the injected particles would sufficiently just disappear. And what does that do? A rapid rise in temperatures. And this is the so-called termination shock that would ideally be a nightmare scenario for the African continent. So Africans see how their continent is being used as a testing ground for these dangerous technologies. And Africa is the continent that is most vulnerable to climate change. So the argument goes, and that's would benefit the most from geoengineering. In fact, Africans have the most to lose from a failed geoengineering technologies. So I think there's just a spider web of problems and challenges that the continent faces. But what I love about this space that we've created is that we're able to brainstorm and dialogue on the potential and how African can rise beyond our challenges that I've tried in the very few minutes to really unpack. So back to you, Thato, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dean. You shared so much, and I think on the inequalities of this facade of carbon trading and carbon markets. I am aware that in Europe you can trade carbon for 84 euros, and for Africa you can only get it for $6. And I mean, this is just a whole, like you said, it's a web of neo-colonialism. And I'm going to pass on to Goodness, and as he shares on the untapped energy sources and the need to double the adaptation finance, knowing that Africa is able to sustain itself. Please share with us the role of youth in addressing environmental challenges with intergenerational dialogue, knowledge transfer, and community-based solutions. Over to you, Goodness.
Yes, thank you so much, Thato, and thank you for having me on this session. You know, when we talk about the role of youth in addressing environmental challenges, first of all, we want to know who is classified as youth, because if we don't know the concept about who youth is, then we might miss the point here. You know, different continents get to classify youth based on maybe the level of, maybe by the age group or by their level of understanding and other things. But in Africa, I think youth are classified from between the age of 17 to around 35. These are age bracket of youth. And we'll talk about the role of the youth now. Now, we cannot do away with the fact that youth play a very important role when it comes to addressing environmental issues, because when you look at the brain, look at people who have the experience, okay, more like people whose brain are really in line, they are the youth, and they play a very important role. Number one, when it comes to innovation and grassroots, we'll say that youth actually design some kind of strategical tools, innovations that addresses the issue of climate change and then the environmental challenges that we face. Take, for instance, in Africa, we have the issue of the droughts, the issue of flooding, the issue of desert encroachment, and so many things. And this really affects livelihoods, affects shelter, affects the health too. So when it comes to these innovative ideas, we can say that waste pollution, mostly in Africa, it's a very big challenge. And we'll say plastic. I know that plastic takes longer time for it to decompose. So now, in this case, we have seen where youth design the use of plastics to make interlocking ties, and also to innovate other things that are very useful to our environment. So that is the issue of waste and pollution. Now, coming to the issue of desert encroachment and then maybe flooding and then droughts, we have seen where farmers having the issue of droughts that affect their farmlands. Now, what innovations do youth actually bring in to address this? Now, when we talk about planting of seedlings, and maybe when it comes to that of the flooding, we have seen mechanisms where youth get to place to reduce the adverse effects of this flooding in our environment. So we cannot do away without the youth. Now, when we talk about intergenerational dialogue, youth play a very important role at the table, because they have all the skills, they have all the ideas, they have what it takes, but this issue of the lack of finance, because how do people adapt when there's no finance? Last year, we had a very important project, which is EcoClean for MAPA, and this project actually tried to address the issue of climate change, and that has to do with adaptation, because we carried out research work and some other activities. And we have seen farmers, we have seen people at the community level saying that we have been affected by the flooding and then by the drought, but they don't really understand the issue of the climate. They felt these are just natural phenomenon, whereby whereas sometimes we have the human-induced action that affect or that causes this climate change. And through this interaction with this community and getting data from the research work, this is being used as a way of relating this to the leaders to see how do we address these challenges, because we are the voice. We get to bring what has happened at the grassroots to the international level or at the table where world leaders come to meet. So we cannot push away young people because they play very, very critical role in that aspect. Now we talk about knowledge transfer. We will say Africa actually have little impact of this knowledge, more like the technology. So now there is a need for us to have a knowledge transfer from the Western countries, more like the global North, so that this can be used in solving some of these problems. And we have community-based solutions because we understand the challenges, the problem, and we need to bring this to the table to be able to address them. We have had different COPs. We saw last year COP28 because I was part of the COP. We have seen where world leaders get to meet and then say, this country is going to contribute this to the climate finance or to the finance for adaptation. But when you look at it very well, critically, does this finance really amount to something reasonable that will solve this problem? So if we don't have all of these things in place to present to world leaders, we won't be able to address some of these challenges at the grassroots. And the youth actually are very, very important in this aspect. And I just hope that going to COP29 in Baku, we will see what leaders getting to commit to address these issues. We have seen many young people running organizations without funding. But when the youth get to have this funding support, we can be able to address these problems in our communities and in our environment. And I believe with this platform, we can use this also as a medium of presenting to the leaders at COP to say, these are what the youth have to say, and this is what is happening to be able to solve the climate crisis. And we need to have more young people at critical positions at the global stage, because when we have the young people, the youth, they will be able to represent or get facts, get data from other people who are running this at the community level to be able to address this problem. We have seen the ARUCOI, the LCOI, and then the COI, and these are basically platforms that youth get to come together to make a statement to say, this is what's happening in our regions, in our continents, and this needs to be addressed at the global level. And then I believe that this really go a very long way in addressing these challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Goodness, for sharing. I think for the longest time, we've been sold a dream to believe that we are leaders of tomorrow, when in actual fact, we are leaders of today. And, you see with all these strategical innovations that other youth are developing and taking up space. And like the comrades like to say, we must make sure they feel the heat and the pressure that we are here, and we must uphold them to transparency and keep them accountable. But we need finance, we need resources to, live within our daily lives, to capacitate the different communities that we work in. And then I'll pass it on to Antoniette to share how the global policy landscape and its implications for Africa, particularly in the areas of climate finance, because we do need money to make all these the transition to realize the untapped energy resources, the challenges of securing adequate funding and resources, Africa's position in global climate negotiations, and the outcomes of recent COPs. Over to you, Antoniette.
Thank you very much. And I think I was actually listening to my previous speakers and realizing they're actually saying it all, even on my behalf. Just to start first with the issue of the policy landscape, to be quite honest, just as my previous have said, there is such a great gap. The gap does not only just go into making sure we are ahead, because to be quite honest, we speak every day, but it goes towards the capacity building, the capacity development, and knowing how to scream, when to scream, and who to scream to, and most importantly, how can we scream or how can we shout out our message even in the midst of whatever it is opposing us, which includes the political aspect, something that my previous speaker, but one talked about. How do we keep on communicating the most important thing that is affecting us without politics affecting our voice or our point of view? How do you come in desperate for change, but in a way that it does not make it look like they can use the desperation against us, and at the end of the day we think we have ticked the boxes when we actually have been diverted from the main goal? Those are some of the things that I think we should always be more mindful of. But otherwise, in terms of Africa, one thing that I have learned when it comes to the policies is we actually have good policies. The only problem is this huge gap between policy development and policy implementation. The question is always, who is meant to implement policies? Is it the government? Is it the NGOs? Is it the people, including the grassroots communities? Is it the youth? Who is the one who's supposed to be implementing? And I believe the answer is simple. All of us are supposed to be. But somehow it seems like us young people are the ones who are always more vocal about it, more angry about it, because at the moment we feel like we do not have power. Though we have power, just that it's so limited that we cannot do much, especially when it comes to issues of finances. How can we be able to push the implementation that we desire if we do not have the money, the finances that we require? Even just to say capacity development or capacity building, we do need that kind of money to be able to facilitate that across Africa. If we're going to teach people about laws, about policies, about all these things that regards to climate change and the likes, and seeing how it affects us, then it means that we have to be active on on teaching, on training and all that, and that obviously needs money. I think one of the other things to also talk about, just other than capacity building or capacity development, is also just the issue of advocacy. I think the previous speaker also talked about it. And one of the things that advocacy stands out to say is, here's the reality of the situation on ground. How do we deal with the problems that are happening on ground when it comes to climate change? Somebody talked about drought, somebody talked about flooding. These are the things that are happening. And yes, the pledges do come out. But in most cases, coming from a point from a perspective of a negotiator, in most cases, when pledges are being made, I do not get too excited, because I know that as much as there's a pledge, it does not mean the money is literally here. And the money itself is going to be governed by the very same policies and rules or laws on who gets the money, how much do they get the money, what do they have to do to get the money, and what is the money to be used for. Those are the kind of nitty-gritty details that are very critical. and require us to be more sharpened in our minds to know how to be able to bargain for and negotiate for or fight for, so that the kind of money that is necessary is brought to us or to the relevant people. And yes, to be quite honest, when you look at it, at the end of the day, the grassroots communities are the ones who are mostly affected by climate change, and the ones who are usually mostly affected by the lack of finances. Because if there's a hierarchy, they're definitely down there. And how do you reach out to them for them to be able to have that kind of money? Having said that, I'll just talk a little bit more about the negotiations. I actually negotiate for loss and damage and global stocktake. The reason why I negotiated for these two is because I'm an advocate by profession. I love talking, but not just talking. I love expressing what's happening on the ground. And I know how it feels to be able to lose a lot of stuff, whether you're produce or whatever, and still not be able to be compensated. But not necessarily coming from a mindset of I need to be compensated because I deserve to. Not coming from a point of entitlement, but knowing your rights, knowing what the law says, and definitely knowing how to start negotiating in a way that the law favors us. And the question can be, does the law really favor Africa? If you look at how things are, if it's issues of access to funding, does the law really favor Africa? Well, in my personal opinion, I don't think it does. But what I could just say is, luckily, we have some negotiators, the Africa group of negotiators, who, yes, are fighting hard for Africa to be able to be in the map. But the most difficult thing is our voice heard enough? And I think in most cases, the problem ends up being how many Africans really go there, how many Africans really know what they want, or even much better, when we get into such kind of negotiating platforms where policies can be formed in a way that should money be released or finances be released or implementation be started, we would know to what extent what is going to happen, who's getting the money, how they're getting money. Are we really there, present and active in such platforms? It's a question that we could ask ourselves. And also just basically reflect on our countries. How are they really performing? How are our countries performing or coming out? And to make sure that those kind of things are really highly touched. And having said that, going back to the issues of loss and damage funding and also the global stake negotiations, one thing that I have already realized is when you get into a negotiation room, I come representing Botswana. That's my country. And somebody else comes representing their countries. And one thing that we should always know is all of our points are very important and deserve to be heard. But in the same space, we could be asking for the same thing, just differently. Like we could all be asking for coffee, just that my coffee needs to have no sugar, the other person's coffee needs to not have milk, or the other person just wants coffee that is guaranteed to have been made by a plant-based whatnot with no nuts, interactions, and all those things. And sometimes that's so easy to deal with. It's not as easy as that, because we are talking about 190 something countries who are in the table, represented or representing also different groups, whether it's the G77 in China, the developing countries or developed countries, the least developed countries, whether it's the small islands and all that. And it can be very overwhelming, which means you can literally be negotiating for one thing for close to 5 years and not reaching an agreement. And when you think about it in that way, you feel it can look like it's a waste of time. But at the end of the day, the question is, beyond just the policies, beyond just the dragging negotiations, how can we and our communities, our countries, find means of stepping up for ourselves? And much more importantly, how can we, in terms of NGOs, CSOs, and private sector, step up to the party and not just wait for the negotiations to favor us and do something that is necessary for the youth, for the grassroots communities who are very important and deserve the kind of attention. So in a nutshell, there are a lot of financial gaps. There are a lot of issues around financing, which mostly are all about the laws, the rules, the text, the decisions on who gets the money, when do they get the money, how do they get the money, and all that. And it ends up affecting us. It ends up feeling like we're talking a lot and not doing much. And it ends up feeling like there is a lot that is being said about climate change, and there is nothing that is being done. Like we're just singing like a mosquito. You know how a mosquito sings and sings, and sometimes it's just disturbing so much because there is not so much productivity from the singing. And that gap alone can lead to a lot of problems, or rather setbacks. But as NGOs, as beyond just all those panels of negotiations, beyond just the policies that are there are always those gaps where NGOs, CSOs can come in and be able to do the necessary part. That is what's most important, and that's what we should be doing. That's what we should be making sure we do through collaboration, or whether it's bringing the indigenous knowledge and skills to be able to bring it all to the party, to be able to combat climate change even beyond the kind of finances that we are always expecting from the developed countries, who they themselves have the terms and conditions on how their money should be spent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoinette. I love the question of, are we really there? And then it took me back to, this whole feeling disgruntled and not collaborating strategically. And we're screaming. Well, all of us are screaming, but screaming in different directions and to a certain capacity that we're not on the same frequency in order to effect the change that we want to see. And I know DGA is working on a strategy that, that will help address these gaps where negotiators feel they're pushing on one end, youth is feeling they're pushing on one end, and then we have other campaigners who are pushing on another end, and it kind of seems like we're not coming all together, so that we can have that unified voice and unified front, so that the pledges can come in with actual money, and to help Africa realize and know its worth, and then we can stand on business. Then I will give the floor to you guys to share your last words, and then Jana will do the closing for us. Antoniette, you can go first for the closing.
Is this a ladies first?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in closing, I'll just go back to say we need to find ways of, I'm reading the topic, the title, to explore critical challenges in Africa that Africa faces and identify actionable steps to foster this sustainable development. And I believe that the most important thing is, can we collaborate as Africa? And can we be able to do what is necessary without having to wait for external assistance? Is it something that can be done? Because all this time we're always saying we're waiting for money, we need funding, we need this, which is true. But how can we find means of making sure that we achieve our goals even if we do not have anything? Think of it this way. If a mother has kids at home and they don't have much money or a source of income, somehow a mother always finds ways of making sure that their kids are fed. If we could look at it from that point of view, and then look at it also with regards to climate change, with regards to sustainable development, I believe that we can make it, because as it stands, a lot of us have the capacity, whether it's knowledge, capacity, indigenous knowledge, and all those things. We have the kind of resources that we need to be able to get there. And it's better to move from 1 to 3 than not move at all, because you're expecting to just take one leap of 1 to 10. And that's just one of those things that we could do. Collaborating standing up and being more determined to get towards where we want to go. And also, one last important thing, while we are trying to collaborate and work on it, there's a high likelihood chances that there are other people who are also collaborating, who are also passionate and doing the very same thing, just waiting for us to take the first step that gives them the kind of courage that they need for them to be able to take the other steps. So we can do it all together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anto. Over to you, Goodness. There's some commitments to be made on taking that step from 1 to 3. What are your last words on that?
Yes. So when we talk about the commitment, we, as she has said, the last speaker, she said that finance, it's not really the final step towards addressing this, but I would say when we have the knowledge, when we have the solutions already, and then youths have been placed at the table, I think this really help in passing the message across to world leaders, because we cannot say want to address this issue without linking or bringing in the people who are developing the solutions to the table. It is just like saying you want to build a house, and then there's no architects, there is no engineers on the site, and say you want to build your house. This won't be feasible, because you might end up just using what you know to build, and then at the end, you will actually have maybe a collapsed structure. But the youth having to play the important role in this aspect, they need to be involved. And then I believe with the solutions, and then join with the finance too, and then the policy, as my other colleague has said, this really help solving this problem. And the time to act is now. There's no other time and take action now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Goodness. The time is now, indeed. And with that, to avoid us sounding like mosquitoes, and despite our efforts, over to you, Dean. I know you're cooking something up for us, and we are hopeful. What are your last words today?
Thank you. I'll try not move like a mosquito as well. But I think I'm feeling very inspired by the conversations had. I think, I mean, as I said, Africa stands at such a critical moment in history. And a moment where the unity and the resilience of our people will essentially define the continent's future. And in order for us to combat the devastating impacts of climate change, we must really embrace the strength that lies in our diversity and our shared commitment to a sustainable future. And I think this is just not just a fight for survival, right? It is a fight for dignity, it's a fight for justice, and the right of every African really to thrive on their land. And our success in this really hinges on the collective power of civil society organizations across Africa. We need to come together. We need to share knowledge and resources and passion. We can really forge that Pan-African alliance that's strong enough to lead the world as a whole in climate action, to be fair. So let us really be that generation that redefines our destiny, and not just simply stand and be victims of climate change, but stand as architects of a brighter, greener, and more just Africa. So I believe together we can, and together we will, and we'll transform the continent for ourselves, for our generations to come. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I hope this is just but one baby step towards the bigger picture for the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. And I hope we're going to carry this energy and inspiration moving forward. It doesn't end just today, as the norm can be after the panel discussion. the inspiration, the love, and then the fire dies. Let's carry it into our respective communities and continue pushing, however menial or minute the steps we might think they are. We out there, we're inspiring somebody. And I thank you so much for your contributions. You guys are doing such amazing work. And I'm very proud to be acquainted to all of you. And I hope that we'll keep on meeting more often like this to share ideas, to share resources, and to unpack these conversations. Over to you, Jana.
Well, thank you all so much for what you are doing in the world. This has really been amazing. You're all just incredible speakers and very powerful. And thank all of you for watching this and for being a part of the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. Please go to we.net to get involved and even make a contribution if you want. Goodbye from all of us at We the World, and let's go from a me society to a we society. Thank you.